So here we are again. I think we're recording. Number 13 in our series. 13, not necessarily an unlucky number. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We've talked about domestic politics before, quite a lot, and we've touched upon foreign policy, most recently last time, although much more could be said about that, and we will be returning to that. But this time, by popular request, that is from my conversation partner, Anders, we're doing a video on populism, of all things. And populism is a word that's used quite a lot. You have the same word in Swedish. But the question is, what is it? What does it mean? And populism in an American context is very, very important. It has a very long history. There's been all sorts of different examples. And I think there's something in the making of the American country itself that lends itself to populism. And maybe that's something we can come back to. But in preparing this video, I found it very useful. I don't know if it's worthwhile to even show this on the computer, but I do read things. And I can highly recommend this book, the very highly recommended A Very Short Introduction series put out by Oxford. And this is just called Populism. And it's an excellent introduction to the topic. And what the authors there were trying to do was to arrive at a definition, a very basic definition of populism that could be applied to different movements at different times in different countries, South America, Peronism, for example, the United States, the People's Party, Russia, and also historically and in modern days, for example, in Europe, in Hungary, reactions against the EU and so forth. But come up a really basic way of looking at this particular phenomena. Because since it's not a full-fledged ideology like Marxism or fascism or what have you, it can be difficult. It can be a bit difficult to get a grasp on what it actually is. And the authors here talk about, look at the quotation again, they defined it as being a thin ideology, which means not so much a full-fledged ideology, but a sort of a group of ideas or even a discourse. And they look at this, as they call it, a thin-centered ideology, something that really needs to rely on and more comprehensive ideologies to survive. But the main thing that a populist movement does is that it divides people into two categories that never meet. One is the people, one homogeneous group, and they're the good people. And then you have the elite, which for one reason or another are corrupt and are doing bad things to the people. And you find this in both left-wing, this applies to both left-wing and right-wing populists. And it's that connection in American history that I'm most interested in. What is left-wing populism? What is right-wing populism? And what's the difference between them? Or are there any overlapping similarities? But this basic starting point is something very important to keep in mind. So you have a sort of a group of ideas. People feel that something's wrong with society, and then they divide it into these two groups, the people who are the good people and the elite who are bad people doing things to the people. I don't know, is there something you would like to add on to that or compliment about Sweden, or Anders, do you want to say something?
One thing that might be worth mentioning is when populists talk about the people, especially right-wing populists, the people is usually fairly narrowly defined. the people in the sense of like the real people.
Oh,
It's not just everyone. Like, for
yeah,
example, in the current American context, it's generally meant to understand like real Americans, like
right.
white Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
Oh.
Uh, so it's a selectively used
Yeah.
sense of the word people.
No, you're definitely right. Yeah, and it's very interesting to. Yeah, we'll be talking more about that, how it's used in, especially in the age of Trump, um, and having grown up in America, and of course, having taught American history and politics, and then doing these, I find it enormously fascinating, but at the same time. Uh, and it's not just now, it's throughout American history, you find these different streams. And yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. But we thought it would be a good idea, not only to have start with the basic definition, but to say something about the historical background in the United States. So we'll have a little history lesson, because these things aren't all that well known in Sweden, but it's very important to understand the background to the present day situation, and the very important role that I would say left wing, for lack of a better term, populism has had in American society. So basically, when we're looking at modern day populism, people look to the second half of the 19th century in America. This is following the Civil War, when America is expanding coast to coast economically. Uh, and yeah, there's various popular movements that are taking place. And one of them became known as the People's Party. What was happening really, and it's also a geographical element of the West versus the East. Basically, the populist movement at the end of the 19th century in the 1890s was primarily, but not solely, a farmers' movement. And they were small farmers. This is when there were small farmers in America. And they were reacting against the way the monopolist capitalist elites in the East were basically ripping them off. A lot of the focus was on the railroads, which were, of course, privately owned by billionaires. And of course, they could make the farmers pay whatever, whatever they liked. So they were being exploited by the bankers and by the monopolists in the East. So that was one element. It was sort of dissatisfaction with the status quo. So a very strong farmers movement. It starts earlier, but it really picks up speed at the end of the 1880s, and it becomes an organized opposition. Quite often, if you look at, for example, Wikipedia, it forgets about the labor element, because there were workers involved in this as well. And you have two important organizations, the People's Party largely representing farmers, but also workers, but also something which has disappeared from American history, an organization which I always found fascinating, and that's the Knights of Labor, which was a really strange organization. It was definitely not a modern trade union, but it was really interesting. And it started in the after the Civil War. Knights of Labor, they wanted to organize everybody, and they tried to organize everybody, men, women, African Americans, whites. So this is really radical. But it was such a big organization that it sort of fell apart, and also was sort of replaced by something called the AFL, which is still in existence today, which was a more conservative union, but better organized. But anyway, these two organizations, the People's Party and the AFL, sort of headed this massive populist movement. And what they wanted to do, not only to get lower prices on the goods that they were transporting, but they wanted to have democratic reforms. And one of them was, shockingly, the direct election of senators, because at this time, senators were appointed by the state legislature, something important to keep in mind about democracy in America. And they had a number of other democratic reforms. To make a long story short, the People's Party had success early in the 1890s, but then after the presidential election of 1896, when they decided to support the Democratic candidate who lost, for various reasons, the movement dies out. What I think is important about the populist movement is I see this as a part of a broader movement towards democracy in the United States. The populist movement at the end of the 1890s, which led indirectly, one can say, to another very important reform movement, the progressive movement that takes place in the beginning of the 20th century. And they promote other democratic reforms. For example, the primary system, which whether it's good or bad, no, but in the political parties. But they wanted to make, again, a left-wing progressive movement that wanted to include more people in the democratic process. So they put forward democratic reforms. And you had Democrats and Republicans and, well, progressives, as they recall, working for more democracy. And then after that, in the 1930s, you then have this third movement, which is much better known, and that is Roosevelt and the New Deal, and we won't go into that. So between the 1880s and the Second World War, you have these three really important dominant movements, and they're all in favor of making democracy more inclusive and instituting democratic reforms. So populism is one of those. And then we get to the Second World War and things change. But I'm going to stop there and ask Anders, what do you think of that historical introduction? And yeah, what are your thoughts on these movements? Because of course you're very familiar as well.
It's a it's a really good overview. One thing that I would note is a lot of the specific policies of the People's Party are very similar to like concurrent social democratic political demands, like the 8-hour workday and stuff like that.
Right.
So from like a Swedish perspective, it's tempting to see them as kind of contemporary comrades of the Social Democrats of the time. The main difference is the People's Party was much more loosely organized, right, and much less attached to like an actual ideology.
Right.
It's more like common sense politics.
Right.
But it's also like interesting going back in time. One of the things reading up on this that really struck me was like the People's Party was one of the main policy demands that they organized around was greenbacks, right, fiat money going off the gold standard.
Right, right.
And this is a conflict between small landowners and capital going back all the way back to the Whiskey Rebellion, just like about a decade after the War for Independence, right, the American Revolution. Right. And the reasons are basically the exact same. People back then, during the Whiskey Rebellion, talked about a money shortage because the gold standard meant money was actual hard currency was in short supply, which made it hard to come by for ordinary people. So they instead relied on bartering with whiskey, because that's something that it's imperishable. It's not perishable, and it's a good store of value. And the Whiskey Rebellion was basically sparked by a tax on whiskey. And the main motivating factor behind the People's Party was basically the same.
Right.
Small landowners getting into economic problems due to lending, taking out loans
Right.
being extremely expensive because of money shortage, i.e. deflation. So it has like very deep roots in American history, basically going back to the revolution.
Right.
And that's just like an aside, but it's quite interesting.
No, but that was actually the central position of the People's Party, as you mentioned, and the Democratic candidate, Democrat William Jennings Bryan, I think the famous quotation from him. So he wasn't actually a populist, if you like, but he had those leanings, obviously, and he spoke for populists. He said in one speech that mankind or humankind shall not be crucified. This is coming from a history lesson somewhere. Shall not be crucified on a cross of gold or something, something like that. But yeah, it's this whole thing about the gold standard. It's quite interesting because actually I'm in touch with a person in California who's very knowledgeable about economics. He's not really interested in politics, but he works in, well, not in finance, but he helps recover funds. And surprisingly, he's when we've corresponded, he says, "Well, American politics, I'm not really interested. It was really interesting, what you have to say." But he knows a lot about the gold standard. He thinks that America should go off the gold standard. And I haven't really gotten into a discussion with him, but there's something there linking something about gold and not, I don't know if it has something to do with populism or.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up a bit. I should say also to anyone watching, we're having real connection issues.
Yeah.
So if we're talking over each other, not because we're like impolite or angry at each other or something, it's just technical difficulties. No, but the issue of currency, that's like central to political power. It's always going to be like a contentious issue.
Okay.
But maybe I should continue on from your history overview. So back in the 1950s, a candy maker called Welcher formed something called the John Birch Society in America. And the John Birch Society is kind of a forebear of groups like Tea Party and QAnon and stuff like that, in that it was extremely like conspiratorial, conspiracy oriented, and highly paranoid about America being taken over by foreign elements like Masons and Catholics and Black people and communists and what have you. And the John Birch Society grew and grew, and eventually one of their favored candidates became the Republican nominee for president, Barry Goldwater. And Barry Goldwater won the nomination for the 1960 election, basically because he was the first candidate who wasn't running as basically just as a compromise candidate, as a response to the success of democratic politics since like the New Age, New Deal era and forward. And this meant further influence for the John Birch Society. And they grew and grew and became, they're kind of a curiosity, a historical curiosity. But their legacy lived on, and their style of politics came to prominence within the Republican Party, and it's a highly reactionary type of politics, and the main ingredient is like a reaction to a perceived loss of privilege for so-called real Americans, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, male white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and heterosexual, of course. And as time has gone on, and the American society has opened up and become more pluralistic, this sense of aggrievement has it has basically like rolled over the political landscape in waves. Like you could easily make a case that the election of Richard Nixon came about because of this, the so-called silent majority.
Oh yeah.
Voting for Nixon, and also the election of Ronald Reagan, who used a lot of racialized language and like dog whistles and appeals to various kinds of bigotries, and leading up to the modern day, starting in 2010 with the launch of the Tea Party, also basically as a response to Barack Obama being elected president, like the first Black president. That definitely fueled their sense of aggrievement. And the Tea Party has, over the past 10 years, become more and more force in American politics more than a dozen times, and they keep coming back. What eventually happened was they got another candidate elected to first winning the Republican primary, and then going on to be president of the United States. That's Donald Trump. And looking back, you can trace a fairly clear ideological line from the John Birch Society, and even further back from the Klan. Their like, the non-Christian.
You disappeared. You froze up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
After the Klan.
Yeah. After.
We got back to the Klan. Maybe.
Oh, okay. So basically, you can trace an ideological through line from the Ku Klux Klan and their particular fears and hates up until modern day, the Tea Party, which is highly nativist, bigoted against everyone who's not a white Anglo-Saxon heterosexual Protestant male. And they got their candidate in Trump, and he's now captured the Republican Party in its entirety, basically. Everybody who tries to stand up to him is basically run out of the party at this point. So the current Republican Party is basically a melding of the classic populist tradition, the right wing of the populist tradition, and what Richard Hofstadter called the paranoid style in American politics, fear of the other, and perceived loss of privilege. And so, am I right about that?
Yeah, in fact, it goes back even earlier. No, I think, when I look at American history in terms of populism, I would say from the end of the 19th century after the Second World War, you have left-wing reform movement, left-wing populism in various shapes and sizes, if you like. And then after the starting immediately after the war, then you have, again, Hofstadter's paranoid style of American politics. then basically the only thing you have, with only a couple exceptions, is this right-wing populism. And as opposed to left-wing populism, which tries to bring more people into the political process. I would argue right-wing populism, and we see this so enormously clearly now with Donald Trump and what we talked about before, about gerrymandering and rigging elections, the undemocratic nature of the Electoral College, and the way Republicans want to restrict voting, more than 300 measures throughout the 50 states to restrict voting. Again, try to get your head around that. They try to, there's a basic difference between left and right-wing populism. Some people would argue, no, it's exactly the same. No, it's not. And these right-wing populists are trying to limit democracy, and because that's the only way they can win. The John Birch Society is quite interesting, very powerful in Texas, and especially in the 1950s. If you went to Texas, I was there once, but this was later, you would find signs that said, "Impeach Earl Warren." Earl Warren was probably the most liberal Supreme Court Chief Justice. He was responsible for decisions in the 60s and well, in the 60s primarily, but he was very conservative. And Eisenhower appointed him to the Supreme Court. Eisenhower was not a follower of the John Birch Society, but he appointed Earl Warren because this guy is so conservative, you know, we're home free. And the John Birch Society, this is great. And then as soon as he became Chief Justice, as opposed to the more recent people on the Supreme Court, he turned around and, I don't know, he had a secret identity promoting liberal reform. But before we go on, I would like to, so many of these strands that we find emerging in populism, we find in American society as a whole, going back, you mentioned the Masonic order, you know, the other, the Catholics, the Masonic order, later on Jews, but especially the Catholics and the Masonic order. This goes back to the very founding of the country. And I remember many years ago, I was doing research on a utopian community that existed close to where I grew up, and very little was known about it. So I went through newspapers, I think it was from the 1830s, 1840s, and didn't find out all that much about the family. It was called The Family. But what I noticed was every issue of this newspaper, the Masonic order, or the Pope. I mean, this like, so everything you've read, it was like listening to Fox News today, which is another interesting thing in relation to populism. But it was so deeply ingrained in the American psychic. This is why Hofstadter writes about it. That in itself does not necessarily mean populism, but right-wing populism is so infused with this thinking. And that's another scary thing about it. It is the paranoid mindset. And also going back to the 1950s, you have McCarthyism, which isn't really populism, but it's the fear, communists. And not only, it wasn't so much the Soviet Union, but it was the Russian agents among us. And they're everywhere. And those are the ones. So again, paranoid style of leadership, but the element of fear, this is something which is also a key ingredient, I would say, of right-wing populism, not left-wing populism. It's just the opposite. We're looking forward to a better age. This is fear, be afraid of, and this is where QAnon and everything comes in. And that's why I find this type of populism, and especially the Trump success, as being so very, very dangerous. Back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say that if anyone doubts my fairness in characterizing the John Birch Society as conspiracy-minded kooks, like the Warren thing is like a good example. Both like first of all, they considered Eisenhower basically like a Russian agent.
Oh yeah.
Which is just insane. And also, the reason they wanted to impeach Warren was chiefly because he voted for civil rights legislation, or approved civil rights legislation,
Right.
which for that kind of movement based on aggrievement over lost status is a huge taboo, because that's going to lead to Black people voting and Catholics voting, which is a problem for them. But you see the same kind of, basically exact same kind of loose conspiracies where the conclusion comes first and people fill in the blanks afterwards, in the Tea Party as well. All through the Obama years, you could hear crazy people being interviewed on TV saying that Obama was like a Marxist, Obama was a communist, a socialist,
and a Muslim at the same time,
and a secret Muslim, and so on and so on. So it's, I mean, it's the exact same impulse. And this is the reason, like, I have my quibbles with Richard Hofstadter when it comes to his characterization of the People's Party from the 1890s. I think he's wrong about a lot of things there, but his book on the paranoid style in American politics, that's 100% correct. There's a real strong undercurrent of fear and paranoia running through, especially right-wing politics in America.
Yeah, and in America, the American psyche. This other book he wrote, as I mentioned to you before, I mean, I read Hofstadter in college, and it's a great inspiration. Although I didn't, I agree with your assessment of his book, The Age of Reform, and sort of went off the deep end there. But I mean, he also wrote about the anti-intellectual tradition in America. I forget the exact title, but I read that in college. I came across the title in college, and I thought, what a strange view. Because I mean, I grew up, this is my parents, the Depression and the war and everything else. I grew up in a generation of education and college, and this was a goal. And I wasn't necessarily, if I would have been happy to work for a few years. I wasn't really all that happy to go to college at the time. But I thought, here I am at a small private school in West Virginia, and that there's an anti-intellectual tradition in America. Well, I certainly haven't noticed it, even though I've studied American history. And I started reading it, and I thought, good heavens, and he's talking about the same history that I read. And he was right. And you find these two things merging together in, and again, we were talking about Trump. I mean, anti-intellectualism today is climate deniers and science deniers. And these two, the paranoid thing and the anti-intellectual tradition, believing science and facts. I mean, this is so on visible display in the Trumpite populist Republican Party that is scary. And since we've been living with it every day, it almost becomes normalized. But part of the scary thing is that it goes back in American history. And just one final thing about Trump, which I hadn't thought about. Again, the paranoid thing, the conspiracy theories about Obama and what he was. And it also, the whole birther thing that Trump was instrumental, maybe not in launching, but popularizing, was he actually born in America? And for these people who are Americans or nativists, but it's not just in the Republican Party, it's part of the, it coalesces there. But also, I mean, there's nativist thinking and anti-immigrant thinking in the People's Party as well. But I mean, it is part of, I would see it more as part of the American psyche. And then more the Republican Party is taking advantage. But I mean, it's just so scary. And this is why I'm perpetually amazed. And then that they get away with this stuff. And of course, people will react. But I mean, it's just so, but it's all part of American political culture. But it's terrifying, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the anti-intellectual thing, that's on clear display today. Like all the hatred for university professors and even students. And I remember reading about this. One of my favorite literary critics, John Dolan, talked a lot about growing up in inland California. During the 60s, and he said that most people on his street, they absolutely hated people across the bay in Berkeley and saw them as the enemy, like the enemy of the people, and they actually did not want their kids to go to college because they were like certain that they were going to be poisoned with communist ideas and like all kinds of craziness. And it's the exact same thing you hear people complaining about today in regards to higher education in America, and sometimes here in Sweden as well. And it's kind of scary when you see like those clear like through lines, like ideas visibly like dating back decades, even centuries back into history. Because like I get the feeling that this isn't going anywhere like at any point in time. We're never going to get rid of the paranoia and the fear. I've talked before about like good examples spreading across the world, like Swedish politicians being influenced by British and American politicians, and this the same thing applies to this, I guess. Like these conspiracy theories, they spread probably easier than than ever before over the internet, as evidenced by like the COVID demonstrations recently in Stockholm and stuff like that. And one of the absolutely scariest things is the demonstrations against the COVID restrictions and stuff have been infiltrated by like actual Nazis, organized active National Socialists. And I mean, if it can be used as a tool for radicalizing people here in Sweden as well, then we have a problem on our hands, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure if I mean, the tradition isn't as strong here, I guess, so it might not be cause for alarm, but it's I don't know, it gives me like an unpleasant feeling at the very least.
Yeah, things travel quickly in the age of global communications. No, just things travel quickly, and then of course in the European context, you have with populism is of course the EU, and which is not a terribly democratic structure, is it? No. Even though I'm glad the whole peace project thing, but I mean you have Poland, you have Hungary, and so forth. But reading this book again, I highly recommend a very short introduction where he talks about all these different examples. What I really Trump and what he has achieved stands out as being monumental. I mean, in both the left or right context. I'm thinking more, especially in relation to Perón and Peronism, that was successful in a different type of populism in Argentina. But I mean, you have really, I think, a populist party. And Donald Trump, I mean, everything we've talked about this before, the preconditions leading up to Trump with white nationalism and things you talked about now, and going back to the 1950s, going back to the Southern strategy, how these things led up to Trump. And then almost, and disappointment with Reagan, who wasn't right-wing enough, and especially George W. Bush, you can't trust them either. So there was this search for the leader, somebody who has nothing to do with established politics, and somebody who can speak for the people as they see themselves in the crudest possible fashion. And who emerges on the scene? I mean, and I think in a way, he sort of stumbled onto this, and one can look at it in different ways. Now he knows exactly what he's doing. And he just completely kills it in the first Republican primary debate. And he goes on to succeed in debate after debate. And people say, yeah, this is our leader. And a lot of people are shocked, how can you? And he wins the nomination and he wins the presidency because of this corrupt system of the Electoral College, which should be gotten rid of. And he came close again, winning a second time. But it's interesting to see how these different, you have the organization, because sometimes a populist has to create his or her own organization, like Le Pen, and then maybe when that leader disappears, the whole thing falls apart. But here you have an established party, one of the two main parties of the United States, and he stumbles into it, and he takes it over, and it is. I think we both agree that, and I don't think everybody realizes this, but it is his party.
Yeah.
It is his party. McConnell does not realize this. He still thinks he's in shock. And it is so shocked, but it is Trump's party to do whatever he likes. And if you had asked me this, or I think we even talked about it in the video, that, yeah, have some influence and so forth. But no, things have changed so dramatically in the past month or so that Trump's party, then we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when they kicked out Liz Cheney, that should be like the final nail in the coffin for like all hope of, of taking back control of the party, at least in the foreseeable future.
Yeah,
it's Trump's party now, and even some establishment Republicans, like at the very center of the Republican Party, like Lindsey Graham, has basically come out and said that, yeah, we can't get rid of these people. They're our base now. We don't like them, but what are we gonna do?
Now, the only argument I have with that terminology, as I mentioned before, so the base and the establishment, like there's two different parts of the party. No, Lindsay, you're wrong on so many things, and you have no political backbone or anything else, and we both hate you. But no, it is the party, and Lindsay, you can stay along for the ride. And this is the Mark Rubios and what's his name, Ted Cruz. I mean, they're deluding themselves, and Trump is, and their supporters saying, we have moved on so far from you. And if one looks at the people, the newly elected people to the House, like what's her name I always forget. I mean, they are so much more extreme. They don't care about the old traditional Republican Party. They've created a new party. And McConnell, he has been complicit in this, and he has only himself to blame. I see him as only being second to Trump and bringing about this situation, because he, like certain people in Germany in the 1930s, they think, we can control this person. This guy's a bit of an idiot. He's a bit extreme, but he's our crazy person. No, it's not like that anymore. It's
absolutely. No, I was just gonna say it's entirely the fault of the established the Republican Party, and I'd even go further back. Like Ronald Reagan has a great deal of responsibility for what's happening now, and George H.W. Bush, and like basically anyone who's mobilized and used different reactionary groups in order to take control of the political process, and invited these people into the party. Like it's the Republican Party has a long history of this. And this is the natural culmination of it. the people they thought they could use for political purposes have taken control over the Republican Party, and nothing can be done about it at this point. It's
just to be fair, I'll mention FDR, because the American parties change all the time. But you're definitely right. If we keep it to the post Second World War period, and especially after the 60s and the whole Southern strategy. But I mean, the FDR Democratic Coalition, you had the liberals in the East and the farmers in the West, and then you had the white supremacists, the segregationists in the South. And it was a very interesting relationship between FDR and his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor pushed him on these issues. She was also against the internment of Japanese during the Second World War. I know we don't have to get into but she was very, very disappointed with FDR, and she kept on approaching him. There was they wanted to pass a anti-lynching law, and Roosevelt, like personally. But look at my base. So he had several bases, but he couldn't lose the white Southern vote. And I mean, they had an unhappy marriage for various reasons, but that she just couldn't accept that. And she did different things on her own. She wrote things on her own, although he told her to keep quiet about internment. Don't you dare go public on. But that was before the Second World War. Then the 1950s and the Civil Rights Movement, blah, blah, blah. And the Democrats become the party of civil rights, and the Republicans make this momentous decision instead of, okay, we'll support civil rights too. That might not be a bad idea. No, we're going to be against civil rights. So you're right. I mean, they all said, we'll invite these people in. We can use their votes, and they'll never take over the party. And it's happened.
Yeah, I guess Eleanor should have been president instead of.
In many ways, it's very interesting. Peter Wallenstein and I did what's called a Philosophy Tea podcast on her. She was really, really interesting. Marian Anderson, the African-American opera singer, was going to sing. She was prohibited from singing in, I forget where it was, in New York City. So Eleanor and others, civil rights leaders, arranged a public performance with Black and white people because they didn't want to have a Black and white audience. And I must have been not the Lincoln Center, in the big
Madison Square Garden.
No, the enclosed, the opera, not Grand Central Station either. Carnegie Hall.
Oh.
People can fact check, but I think it was Carnegie Hall, New York City. But you'll have Black and white people there together.
How that?
Like Eleanor was saying, well, less. So I think it was an outdoor concert. I might be wrong about this, but she said, okay, so this is what we're going to do instead. Yeah, she's a very interesting person. So, but so I mean, the Trump party. So where do we go from now if we're both sort of in agreement with this is a problem. This is what the party is now. So this is the new we're talking about the new reality after COVID. This is the new normal. You have a Democratic Party, very broad-based, which is trying to expand democracy. And you have a Republican Party, called Populist or not, that wants to limit democracy. So what do we do?
I guess try to pass the voting rights law that's in Congress at the moment, and just keep these people out of power. Like short term, that's what matters, right. I think, no matter what it takes, basically. And I think Joe Biden might be of the same mind, because a lot of the policies he's passed that you and I have been really happy about should be stuff that peels off a lot of like dissatisfied voters from the Republican Party. It's not going to move anyone who's like a diehard Trump supporter.
No.
Because they're all reactionaries and they're not interested in that kind of stuff. But a lot of the people that, like those voters that voted for Obama because he promised change,
Yes.
and then became disappointed and disillusioned and voted for Donald Trump, that kind of voter could switch over permanently, basically, to the Democratic Party if this political project holds up. And long term, like this is something the Republicans, the right, have to deal with. They have to either split the party and try to form a new party, or just like kick out their own base and try to rebuild the party from the ground up. But I mean, that's going to be a long process. Nobody wants to do anything like that because it's going to mean being completely neutered politically for the foreseeable future. So like short term, this might be hopefully might be a good thing, but at the same time, like the prospect of the Trump-led Republican Party winning another election, that's not very appealing, if you ask me. So,
now we had a hint of what a second term. Again, like I said on local radio, they asked me, when he was elected, what do you think he's going to do? And I said, exactly what he said. And I've been thinking about what if Trump wins again, or a Trump surrogate? I mean, Trumpism is there. And like Perón, he's one of the few people who has given his name to a movement. That's scary. But what would a second Trump administration look like? And I would be a pushback on all these we saw a brief hint of it towards the end of his term in office after he had lost the election. And that's another crazy thing. You don't elect somebody in November and then take office in January. Sorry, the Constitution can be changed. We're a modern society. People don't have to go by horseback from Pennsylvania to well, that's not that far to Washington. But when he started, and I mean, I was really worried. I thought there was a possibility of a military coup. Because he was getting rid of people in the Pentagon, left, right, and center, and he was putting his favorites in there. And that's another scary thing. And you touched on it in an email you sent me, that there is support for him within the military. And there's even more support for him within the police departments of America. But what he was doing, because he was president, he could do these things. People were worried about, an atom bomb. I was more, when he said, okay, I'm going to fire you, I'm going to fire you, I'm going to fire you. And even though he had appointed some of these people, and I'm going to put people, just like this guy Flynn that he pardoned, he's an ex-military man, professional, career military. And I mean, if he can do this ineffectively at the end of his term in office, what would happen if he won and he had a Republican Congress? And another thing, just before I forget, another thing he can add to his resume list. Not only did he win the election, he's transformed the Republican Party, but he has also staged a rebellion against Congress. He attacked the Capitol building. I mean, that's not a good thing, but how many populists can say that? Or as we've talked about earlier, one-term presidents can say that they've been able to do this. He's transformed American politics. And in a way, as you've hinted on, really ended the two-party system. Either the Republicans can rule from a minority position because of a faulty democracy, or the party splits in two, and then you have a one-party system. That's not good either. And it takes a while to grow a second party, or that's a really scary yeah, possible future.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm trying to like see the silver lining, but I mean it's a bad situation. Like it's fun to see people like Mitch McConnell uh, and those guys suffer, but I mean it's still a bad situation. It's
Yeah.
I don't want to sound cruel or anything, but I want to see Lindsey Graham cry. Uh, but yeah, it's like no matter what happens, it's gonna lead to a destabilization of the political system,
Exactly.
and like there's a lot of crazy people out there. Like if the party breaks up and they find themselves again in a permanent minority, and they take their paranoid delusions and grievances even further. Like people have been warning about this for the last few years, but people might take up arms. Like who knows?
Yeah.
Like stochastic violence is it's a thing. It happens, and it's gonna happen at some point in the future, and this might be the thing that leads up to it.
Yeah.
So at the same time, like did I freeze up again?
Here, I think we both did. I don't know. No, I was thinking of an alternative scenario, something. I mean, there is a new group. It's called the Movement for a People's Party. People who were very disappointed that I first supported Bernie Sanders, who we hope to do a special program on sometime. And then when he was outmaneuvered in the Democratic primaries. To start a new party. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I mean, compared to what the Republican Party has begun, but maybe something, and again, this doesn't really answer your or speak to your fears, but what if America moves into a multi-party system with a different voting system? There are a couple states that use the single transferable. Well, I mean, again, these are small things, just like this movement for a People's Party, but it doesn't solve the problem. But I mean, I would like to see an America like that, and maybe it's having lived in Europe too long, but why not? Why not a multi-party? I know it's not in the cards, but could that be an option? And you froze again.
Oh, sorry. It'd be nice, I guess, but like a lot of the stuff you might want aren't terribly likely to happen. I mean, it's like my thing about getting rid of the Senate. Like, it'd be so nice, but I don't think it's gonna happen. Like you might as well wish for reactionaries to just go away.
That would be nice too. Lindsey Graham should go away, and others. Talk about crying. I mean, it was. I don't know if he had a habit of crying. What was his name? From Ohio.
Boehner.
Sorry. Boehner.
John Boehner.
Yeah, John Boehner. Yeah.
Boehner.
I mean, the Tea Party made him cry. I mean, it felt strange for him. So again, the signs were there. They forced him out. And then now we're living in the age of Trump, and then
it's a disaster. No, me neither. Okay. Like we'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah.
Who knows? Things might work out.
Yeah. That was a powerful ending. No, but I think, it's the voting rights thing. It's really, really essential. And I hope Biden realizes you have to get rid of the filibuster, But also a point you made, which is very important, that these policies, not everybody that voted for Trump in the most recent election is a hardcore Trump supporter, and especially the Latinos and also to a certain extent Black voters. They responded to Trump because he said, "I'm going to create jobs." Wow, but that was enough to get people to vote for him.
Yeah.
It said something about Biden, but as you say, I mean, these proposals for the rescue plan for America, hey, there's something in there. I mean, and healthcare and everything else, all these things. And I think that's what the Democratic Party has to do to revitalize itself, is to push these issues and say, this is what we need in our local communities. And I know local Democrats are doing this. And then you have gerrymandering that makes it more difficult. But it'll be very interesting. There are two things. Yeah, get the Voting Rights Act passed, and also to win the midterm elections. Two very, very important things. So it could change things. It could change things dramatically. So I guess the only thing we can do is really point to the problem, because I think a lot of people in America, well, maybe on the left they realize this, but like CNN or the MSNBC, which is that I don't even pay attention to anymore, but they don't quite realize the danger that they're in, and hopefully Biden does. And the only thing one can do is sort of look at the situation today and see what it is, and then try to find ways to deal with it. So yeah, would you like to give some concluding remarks? We're kind of coming.
I just want to, in response to what you just said, like, people in America might not realize how bad and how quickly this could go bad, because they don't have the same experience of the rise of fascism as a lot of people here in Europe have. But also, like, I think the main takeaway is populism, as you alluded to earlier. Populism, it can be like a terrible thing, but it can also raise like valid concerns about lack of democratic input from the people, and I think left-wing populism, I mean, it's fairly closely related to democratic socialism many times. And the answer for America to right-wing populism might be left-wing populism, like Bernie Sanders or someone like Joe Biden taking a left turn. That might be the correct solution, the recipe. And I think, like I said a week or two ago, we'll have to see how this bears out and what conclusions Democrats draw from response to the current Biden program. If this thing works out, I think they might have taken the right steps at the right time to actually sort this thing out, and it might be a wave of reactionary populism that rolls back again. That's the best you can hope for, I guess. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good note to end on. I mean, we're so focused and obsessed with the Trump thing. I mean, things are happening within the Democratic Party as well. So yeah, no, I won't say anymore. I think that's a very good note to end on. And but we obviously have there'll be things to talk about in the future about the political parties.
Yeah.
So maybe we could end for today. Then you and I can talk about what we might deal with next time. But I thought it was really interesting to talk about this, and I hope people have a better understanding of what populism is and how it can be, enhance democracy, and how it can be a threat to democracy, and also a deeper understanding for the political situation in America today, which is always fun to look at. So thank you, Anders.
Thank you.
And thank you, viewers or listeners. And we continue to struggle with technical difficulties, but it's almost become, it's part of the program. So this is welcome to the age of Zoom. So thank you all very much. And I will stop recording and upload this later this week. Thanks again.
Right.